Having recently lost my father, I decided to split the $5 million inheritance between my mother and myself. This resolution came during a poignant moment shortly after my father's funeral. As I was reviewing the inheritance documents, Brian, without any right, casually remarked, "Laura, don't be greedy." His next words shocked me even more. "Finally, I can quit my job. I owe it all to that doddering old man." I was appalled. "Are you referring to my dad?" I asked incredulously, unable to hide my shock. Brian ignored my dismay, and together with my mother-in-law, they excitedly made plans to buy a new car and go on a shopping spree. This unexpected behavior was too much for me. Here I was, grappling with my father's death, overwhelmed with household responsibilities, and now listening to them insult the man who had just passed away. The thought of continuing to live with Brian and my mother-in-law became unbearable. Trying to keep my composure, I managed a forced smile and said, "Sure, use the money as you and my mother-in-law, please. My name is Laura Brown. I'm a 40-year-old housewife who works alongside my husband. I grew up as an only child to parents who were both doctors and ran a highly respected clinic in our hometown. They showered me with affection, and although I chose a career in pharmacology over medicine, they supported my decision. Tragedy struck our family 8 years ago when my mother died in an accident, leaving my father and me heartbroken. During those difficult times, Brian, then my boyfriend, was my pillar of support. We met through a mutual friend, and 3 years after my mother's passing, Brian proposed. Brian worked as an ordinary salaryman in the food and beverage industry. Despite my higher earnings, I believed that love would help us surmount any challenges. My father was thrilled when I announced our engagement. "I have seen how Brian supported you, Laura. Thank you so much. Please continue to take care of her," he said. Brian promised my father, standing tall, "I will make her happy." I felt a surge of happiness standing beside him, convinced of our bright future together. But when we visited Brian's family to announce our engagement, his mother, heavily made up and a divorcee herself, looked me over critically. "Marriage, huh? You're Brian's choice? Isn't she a bit plain for you and older too? Wouldn't a younger woman be more suitable?" Her words were like a cold splash of reality in my dreams. Brian's retort caught me off guard when his mother questioned whether a younger and prettier girl would suit him better. "Mom, Laura works at Gold Pharmaceuticals, and her dad is a doctor who runs his practice," he said, focusing more on the financial aspects of my background than my personal qualities. His mother's demeanor quickly shifted to one of approval. "Oh, Brian, you should have mentioned these important details sooner. That changes everything. I'm happy to approve of the marriage. Nice to meet you, Laura, and thank you." With his mother's approval secured, Brian was elated. Yet, despite the smooth progress towards our marriage, I felt a lingering unease. As we prepared to officially register our marriage, my father, who was not only a doctor but also a property developer, presented us with a generous wedding gift, an apartment in Philadelphia, USA. I shared the exciting news with Brian. "Dad has given us this apartment as a wedding gift. It's our new home. Let's live here happily and peacefully together." Brian's smile radiated happiness, marking the beginning of our married life. However, the reality of married life soon revealed unsettling truths. Brian, who had lived with his parents until our marriage, seemed almost entirely incapable of handling household chores. He couldn't cook, was clueless about operating the washing machine, and showed no interest in learning. His habits were messy. He left garbage scattered around and never bothered to clean up. While I was committed to sharing household responsibilities evenly, Brian's carelessness only increased my frustration. During our first year of marriage, I shouldered all the household duties. Although it was our honeymoon phase, the burden of managing both work and home life alone wore me down. By our second year, I reached my breaking point and decided it was time for a serious discussion about sharing household duties. I gathered my courage and expressed my dissatisfaction to Brian, hoping for some understanding or willingness to change. To my dismay, his response lacked both gratitude and reflection. "I'm tired from work too," he said dismissively. "You're much better at chores than I am. It's better if you handle them since I'm not good at it." Dismissed so casually, Brian continued to avoid helping with the chores, leaving me to manage our home almost single-handedly. As our marriage progressed, I found myself increasingly bearing the burden of our household responsibilities, but that wasn't the only challenge I faced. After marrying Brian, I also discovered that his mother had some demanding expectations. Brian never showed much interest in celebrating seasonal occasions, so I decided to send a thoughtful gift to his mother for Mother's Day. I chose a high-quality scarf and a bouquet of carnations, thinking she would appreciate the gesture. However, her response left me stunned. She called me, sounding displeased, and criticized the scarf for not being a luxury brand item. I attempted to explain the quality of the scarf, but she dismissed my explanation, insisting that she only wanted gifts from renowned luxury brands. Feeling bewildered, I relayed the incident to Brian when he returned home, hoping for some support. Instead, his response was dismissive. "It's just a scarf, just do as she says." From then on, to avoid conflict, we resorted to giving her cash as she demanded. Moreover, by our 6 years of marriage, Brian's mother began to visit our home frequently, often finding reasons to ask for money. Brian, without hesitation, would always oblige, handing over money with a smile. Despite my having a job, Brian's income was modest, and managing our finances became increasingly difficult. Driven by desperation, I began to dip into our savings and cut living expenses. Despite my frustrations, I reminded myself that Brian's mother had supported me during tough times, and as the mother of someone I cared about, I felt compelled to endure these challenges. Now, in our 7 years of marriage, I continue to manage all household chores and the demands for money from my mother-in-law. During this routine, my father, whom I hadn't seen in some time, called me unexpectedly. The news he shared during our rare meeting was heart-wrenching. He revealed that he was suffering from terminal cancer and that treatment was no longer an option. Overwhelmed with shock, tears spilled from my eyes. My father gently stroked my head, comforting me as he did when I was a child, and softly said, "Laura, this is fate. Let's accept it quietly." Faced with this devastating news, my days became a relentless juggling act of work, household duties, and visits to my father's hospital. While my job provided some flexibility, managing the household remained a challenge. When I informed Brian that I would be caring for my father during this difficult time, he showed no reaction or willingness to help, leaving me to navigate these hardships largely on my own. Dealing with my father's sudden illness was overwhelming, and Brian's lack of support only added to the strain. "Please do your best," was all he could muster, and he visited my father in the hospital just once. With my attention fully on my father's care, I had little energy left for Brian. If I had any time to spare, it was only natural that I wanted to dedicate it to my father. One day, as my father lay weak in his hospital bed, he asked me out of the blue, "Laura, how is your marriage with Brian going?" His question caught me off guard. Reflecting on Brian's indifferent attitude at home and his mother's demanding behavior, I found myself at a loss for words. My hesitation must have spoken volumes because my father gently told me, "Laura, you don't have to endure all this. Think about your happiness. Don't worry, you won't face any hardships after I'm gone." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I wept as he held my hand firmly and silently. 4 months later, the inevitable happened. My father passed away quietly. Amidst immense sorrow, I began arranging his funeral. Brian, however, seemed detached from my grief and offered no help with the preparations. Despite this, I was too occupied with the funeral details to focus much on Brian. Many friends and acquaintances came to pay their respects, making it a deeply moving farewell. Even the usually indifferent Brian and his mother attended. The day after the funeral, I received a call from a lawyer regarding my father's inheritance. I arranged a meeting to discuss the details, and what I learned was both surprising and overwhelming. After taxes, such as the inheritance tax, my father's estate amounted to over $5 million. He had been successful not only as a doctor but also in real estate investments, leaving behind a substantial fortune, all of which was to be inherited by me, his only daughter. Filled with surprise and gratitude, yet trembling at the thought of managing such a significant sum, I proceeded with the inheritance process. After returning home, I spread out the documents I had received from the lawyer on my desk. Reading through them, exhaustion finally took over, and I dozed off on the sofa. When I awoke, I could hear the cheerful voices of Brian and his mother in the distance, discussing something that sounded far too jovial given the recent events. Their laughter and conversation seemed disconnected from the gravity of our recent loss, leaving me feeling even more isolated in my grief and responsibilities. As I awoke from my doze, I was surprised to see Brian approaching me with a beaming smile. "Yes, Laura, well done," he exclaimed. Confused by his sudden excitement, I noticed the inheritance papers in his hand, the ones I had received from the lawyer. "Wait, don't just read those without asking," I said, shocked and angry that Brian had gone through the documents without permission. However, my mother-in-law, unfazed by my distress, happily chimed in, "Wow, an inheritance of $5 million. Isn't that amazing? Now we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives." I was stunned and couldn't understand why she was so exuberantly laying claim to the inheritance. Brian then turned serious and declared, "About this $5 million, I've decided it will be split between me and my mom." His words felt like a blow, especially since it was right after my father's funeral. Brian had looked through the inheritance documents without my permission and boldly stated, "Laura, don't be too greedy. Oh, now I can finally quit my job. I have to thank that doddering old man." "Doddering old man? Are you talking about my dad?" I blurted out, my voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. "Well, anyway, let's proceed with the inheritance process and get the money into our joint account as soon as possible," Brian continued, ignoring my shock over his blunt and disrespectful remarks. As Brian and my mother-in-law excitedly discussed plans to buy a new car and go shopping, my emotions reached a boiling point. I was burdened with household chores and constantly asked for money, and now they had insulted my deceased father. Holding back my anger, I replied with a forced smile, "Sure, use the money however you and my mother-in-law please." Hearing this, my mother-in-law, seemingly satisfied, said cheerfully, "That's the spirit, Laura. Quick to agree. Now make sure you work hard and earn money. I don't want our savings to decrease, so work hard." I just nodded, pretending to listen to her selfish words. Afterward, Brian and my mother-in-law began living extravagantly as if they had suddenly become millionaires. Brian quickly quit his job, and my mother-in-law practically moved in with us, staying at our house constantly. They would leave in the morning and return laden with luxury brand items from their lavish spending sprees. They even started critiquing high-end restaurants. "The 3-star restaurant we went to today wasn't as great as I expected," they would say, discussing their outings as if they were seasoned celebrities, detached from the reality of our situation. While I was left to manage all the household duties as if I were a live-in maid, Brian seemed under the impression that my father's inheritance would be readily available. He began withdrawing money carelessly from our joint account, and my savings of $140,000 rapidly dwindled. When I confronted them about their excessive spending, Brian just laughed it off. "What are you worried about? Isn't $5 million coming soon? This kind of spending is no big deal." Despite my warnings and protests, Brian completely ignored my concerns. Then, a month later, Brian and my mother-in-law abruptly left for a vacation to Hawaii. I wasn't invited and found myself alone at home. After waving them goodbye, I decided it was time to take a firm stand. About a week later, while I was enjoying a quiet day at home, I was startled by a loud knock on the door. Peering through the intercom monitor, I saw Brian and my mother-in-law standing there, dressed in Hawaiian shirts, looking puzzled. "What do you want?" I asked calmly, yet coldly. Angered by my demeanor, Brian retorted, "What are you talking about? Why won't the door open?" Confidently, I replied through the intercom, "Well, I changed the locks on the door, so of course it won't open." "Why?" "Let's talk this over calmly at the nearby cafe. Please go ahead, I'll join you shortly," I suggested. After a moment of shouting and frustration, they realized their efforts were futile and headed to the cafe. Once I was sure they had left, I followed them. Upon arriving, I found Brian and his mother already there, waiting in a state of fury. "Hey, what's this about? Did you change the locks? Hand over the new keys right now," Brian demanded. "There's no need for me to give you the new keys. You both need to leave that house," I told them calmly. Facing a visibly angry Brian, I pulled out a piece of paper from my bag. It was a divorce petition I had already filled out. "Divorce? You're serious about divorcing me?" Brian was stunned. His mother, equally shocked and bewildered, chimed in, "Laura, why has it come to this?" Their reactions mirrored their disbelief, but I remained resolute, ready to reclaim my life and my independence from their unrelenting selfishness and disrespect. I spoke to Brian and his mother, who were now visibly panicking and flustered. "With the way you've been spending every day, are you sure your finances are okay?" "What money? Of course it's fine," Brian retorted vehemently, almost spitting as he spoke. "Your father's inheritance is coming, right? There should still be over $90,000 in our joint account. Look, I'll show you right now." Saying this, Brian pulled out his smartphone and quickly opened the banking app to check the account. His expression shifted suddenly. "What? What's this? Why is the money gone? It was there just the other day." Hearing Brian's startled reaction, his mother also checked her phone, her face clouded with confusion. I decided it was time to reveal the truth to them while they were still trying to make sense of the situation. "Of course it's gone. I'm divorcing you, so I moved that $90,000 to my account as part of the property division." "What do you mean?" Brian's face twisted in anger for a moment, but then he smirked as if a thought had struck him. "Fine, I'll divorce you then. Transfer the inheritance you got from your dad right away. After all, property acquired during the marriage is split half and half in a divorce, right?" "You might be misunderstanding something," I replied calmly. "Did you not know that the inheritance I received, even though it was during our marriage, doesn't count for property division?" There was a moment of silence as this sunk in. Then Brian and his mother's expressions changed drastically. Perhaps they truly believed they would receive part of my inheritance. I could only sigh in disbelief at their ignorance. "No, that can't be true. That's impossible." His mother's face turned red, a mix of denial and anger flaring up. "Please check for yourself," I said, a hint of mockery in my voice. Brian started frantically searching on his smartphone. "It says here, property inherited by one spouse from a parent is considered separate property. Therefore, it's not subject to division and can't be split between the spouses." "What? Seriously?" His mother, too, looked at the screen in shock. Then Brian approached me, pleading desperately, "Laura, please don't divorce me. I have no savings and no job. How am I supposed to live if you divorce me?" Faced with Brian's weak attempt to sway my decision, I spoke to him clearly and firmly. "What are you talking about? Take responsibility for your actions. I will never forget how you both treated me. I'm divorcing you, and I'll go to court if necessary," I stated firmly, my resolve unwavering. Brian and his mother, taken aback by my fierce determination, a side of me they had never encountered before, shrunk back in fear, their whispers barely audible. With their spirits clearly dampened, I walked out of the cafe with my head held high. In the weeks that followed, Brian and I underwent the divorce proceedings smoothly. The $90,000 I had prudently moved from our joint account was duly recognized as part of the marital property division. Over time, I succeeded in removing Brian and his overbearing mother from my house. Having frivolously spent the money from our settlement, Brian found himself without a penny to his name. Compounding his woes, he was buried under a mountain of bills from lavish overseas trips and other reckless expenditures he had charged to his credit cards, plunging rapidly into debt. To manage these expenses, Brian and his mother were forced to incur even more debt, and now they reside in a dilapidated apartment, laboring tirelessly every day to climb out of their financial pit. The stark reality of their new, humble lifestyle was a brutal shock compared to their previous extravagance. On my end, I made significant changes to my life. I sold the condo I once shared with Brian and moved into the apartment that had belonged to my father. I continued with my job, and thanks to the inheritance I received from my father, I now enjoy a comfortable financial situation. I live with a deep sense of gratitude for my late father, whose legacy has given me a new lease on life. With this fresh start, I am committed to cherishing my life and looking forward to a future filled with peace. I am determined to protect my happiness and spend my days living tranquilly, savoring the stability and serenity I have worked so hard to secure. My focus now is on enjoying the simple pleasures of life, secure in the knowledge that I have overcome significant challenges and emerged stronger.